Are we live? I think we're live. This is incredible. Let's just get started. Give me a moment. I'm just setting everything up and we can get started. Funny thing while that's happening, the background here today looks absolutely ridiculous. It has more creases than my face and it's freaking me out a little bit, but we don't have anything better today. I promise you we're going to fix this. Everything in the background, just can you ignore that, please, for the love of God. I'm just trying to get this thing to work and this is so weird. With that said, I'm happy we're live after 2 days. The last 2 days have been very, very busy and ruminating, so this is definitely messing with my head. With that said, I am finally live again. Alright, we're back. I don't want the whole stream to collapse while we're streaming, which is exactly why we are in the middle of this setup. This is so revealing. How am I not prepared for the live stream that needs to be live streamed every single day at 9 p.m. This is getting increasingly awkward by the second. With that said, we're almost ready to start. Believe me, we're almost ready to start. I just didn't want to delay the stream to a point where it went too delayed and then there was no stream at all, because that's exactly what has been happening for the last 2 days. Not showing up is worse than anything at all, which is absolutely the truth. With that said, let's just get started. Wow. Let's say hi in the chat, everyone, and let's get started. Today we're talking about 6 incredible sites that are seeming to be the future of web design, which is high praise because the sites that we see in these lives are already much, much incredible compared to the stuff that is inside the world of the web. And with that said, my camera is still all over the place, which is very, very weird, and there is a ton of filters active all at once, which limit my ability to do much at all, which is even worse. Wow. I've suddenly have no ability to do anything at all. Why can't I figure this out? This is my own setup. With that said, let's get started. Today's first site of the day that we're looking at. Wow, the stream seems to have closed on its own. This is even more embarrassing than having no stream at all, but we're just continuing on for some reason. We're finally live. Let's get started. This is the moment to start. I'm going to have to put this in the timestamps, but what can you do? The first site for today is makemeplay.com, because again, this is kind of an experiment on the web, and it's kind of not. It takes a very, very basic standard website that is just in everyone's brains, and it makes it work in a futuristic way. So I'm just really, really happy that we get to talk about it at all on the stream. This could be the future of web design. I don't know yet. In fact, I do know. These are the next 6 sites that we're going to talk about today are the future of web design in 2025. Let's get started. The first site that we're talking about is makemeplay.com, which is play.makemepulse.com. This is an everything gaming experience by Make Me Pulse, which is a great brand, honestly, because the websites that they make are out of this world, so you can expect it out of them. You just can. Let's just get started, because a circle on the page says click me, and already I have no idea what's happening. Seems to be like a gambly background. There's a video in the background, which is the weirdest thing of all of them, and even weirder part is I have no idea what these sites today are going to look like, because I haven't reviewed these sites before. They've been sent to me, and with the elements that these sites have, they're supposed to be the future of web design, because they tick all of the boxes I think are going to be very, very active in the next coming years, months, days. And yet, here we have an extremely weird site. Let's just get started. I think you can flip these coins. This is so weird. Again, there is a weird effect that happens, and all of the super cool effects that happen in terms of animation happen because you're switching the background video, which is fun, which is absolutely fine. And you can flip this coin a bunch of times to reveal the same couple of repetitive background videos, which is not surprising at all, honestly. As soon as you start, you get to see this really, really simple page, and absolutely, from the first glances of it, this looks like nothing at all, but many of the techniques used here are from the original Apple sites that came in, which were just extraordinary from a UI design perspective, and that just blew everyone's minds. So this is kind of a variation on that. Instead of keeping the standard static site that has been around since 2012, the reason these sites, including Apple's site, including Make Me Play, are moving forward is because there is motion in these sites, but you just don't see it coming. It's just that simple. With that said, let's just see what that motion looks like. As soon as you start to scroll, instead of the page actually scrolling, you have this real thick piece of text at the bottom going on its own speed. Brands, gaming, and studio. These are the words they want to highlight. They put in their images, they put in elements that you can hover over, but more importantly, they put in the text that needs to be put, and also they hijack the cursor, but they do it on a very, very specific area. One of the complaints that we had with hijacked cursors, where the cursor was doing something more than just looking at it, scrolling, hovering, was that it was just doing something different, and it was so weird and freaky that people were just getting freaked out, and it seemed very, very unnatural. The reason today's site actually works is because you have a cursor that you've slightly hijacked to make what is black purple, a purple radiant hue, which is definitely new to the people, and it's definitely new enough for people to say this is good, this is new, and it's not commanding enough or in front of your face enough for you to just get freaked out by something extremely new happening on the internet. With that said, I am still scrolling downwards and it's going in a completely different direction. This is completely unexpected, and here's the thing. Nothing about this site is unbalanced. You don't lack white space, you don't lack font hierarchy, you don't lack colors, you don't lack any basic element at all. What they do lack is the ability for the user to tell what's going to happen next. Unpredictability. They are extremely unpredictable, which is the opposite of what I just might have said, but what I mean to say is the site is extremely unpredictable, and that is what's working towards its power. You have a site that's just extremely different from the stuff you usually see. It's extremely unpredictable, and as soon as you start to scroll, you get to see this real purple video kind of page. Again, the reason this site works is because it takes video and it uses it in every single way possible that you do not see coming. For example, in the background, if there's a video playing, it's not the most usual place to put videos, which is exactly why people get freaked out at the newness of the whole thing. And now you take a video which is an MP4 generated out of a 3D model, which is what this seems to be, because this kind of photography doesn't happen on real world surfaces most primarily. So this is just a 3D video which is playing as a showreel, which is basically a YouTube embed, which is it's laughable how simple it is to make, but also it's taking the vibe of the website and maintaining it in terms of animations, in terms of every single special effect you'd want to have, and the level of consistency is what keeps the YouTube, the website, the videos all compatible and working as one. And for the people who won't notice the logo at the bottom, or who won't notice this element at the top, it's really, really easy to believe that it doesn't exist, and it's really, really easy to believe that it's the most simplest thing in the whole world. With that said, we'll keep on scrolling, but for a good amount of time it is sticky on its own, which is also an element that happens and keeps on happening. As soon as we start to scroll, we see again more stuff come up, and again consistency of the background always remains. The video changed and it changed on its own. I am not touching the cursor at all. Again, font consistency is always on point. They know how to keep a font size as the header and then retain it every single time they use it, and then they also know how to keep every single smaller font size, even though it's supposed to be smaller and not the most alarming thing in the whole world, which is this paragraph right here. They also know how to keep that going. One of the ways to make these fancy sites work is to make sure whatever font size you choose for the big text, for the small text, is just consistent every single place. And then you also have these elements in the background which you can choose from, which you can select whatever you want from. You also have the same exact card that was used previously, used over here once again. Same exact format, same exact positioning of images, text, elements, a toolbar at the bottom which is quite reminiscent of Apple's and also Windows, macOS and operating systems respectively. So again you give it a very, very native feel, and as soon as the user lets go of the browser's top and bottom bars, this gets very, very immersive really, really quickly. One of the reasons this site works really well is they will use anything, including video, including a bottom bar, status bar, whatever you want to call it, for immersion. They will do anything at all to make a brand's theme exist and to make it work consistently. So consistency is one of the things that's not only present in font sizes and text hierarchies and stuff that you can visually trace and count, it's also present in every single positioning that they could possibly have placed it in. And again the same exact consistency is present for the third time in the exact same card. I've said this before and I'll say it again: if you're making something and if you've made a pretty good version of it, it makes sense to repeat it over and over again, because most new things in web design are new and kind of inventive, and people need time to get used to them. So you have to give them the time to be able to get used to that pattern and to be able to understand it over and over again, which is exactly why you need to have a bunch of same formatted cards just to have all of it work in the name of consistency. With that said, there is a super cool section that happens, and it happens because of the exact principle that I've talked about a bunch of times. I think we need to start naming these principles now. When you get bored of the same exact background color of the same exact format, there is a little bit of an importance of changing the background color just to keep things interesting. So when you're done with sections of a certain kind, when you're not done with sections of a certain kind, it makes sense to have the consistency going every single place you go. But when you're done with sections of a certain kind, it makes sense to really change the background color, which is exactly what they do here. Increase motion, because you want there to be motion, because you want things to be dynamic. If things are too expected, it's no longer a dynamic site, it's no longer a site of the future. At least it's not something that surprises people anymore. So that's just always consistent. Again, I would want to point out here, the color scheme is very, very minimal, and yet it's very consistent, which is exactly why it works. The show reel that we saw at the top, and then the logo, and then the color is just black, white and purple, and it's the exact same shade of all three of those, and it just doesn't change, which is exactly why there's a level of groundedness and consistency going around every single place we go. Another thing to mention here is, yes, they did change the background color because things did get boring beyond a certain point. So now you have this background going on, which hijacks the cursor only where text is present. You have elements which are using unknown, unseen animations, stuff that you wouldn't usually see going on every single place. And animation and motion is always happening, which is exactly what gives this site the groundedness that it does. And again, you have a pattern of a certain kind of a section going, and then you keep on repeating it over and over again. Every single time things get boring, you kind of change the background color, kind of change the colors, but the same exact patterns keeps on going again. And the way HTML is made for programmers, it looks much different. You have a field, and then you have a rectangular weird box, and everything is just really boilerplate, and people will just go ahead with that consistency. But at some point, when you're customizing everything, customizing the styles heavily is required, and they are able to meet that expectation here, which is exactly why there's motion in the form and there's fun in the form, and the form actually really works really well. Again, the unexpected element always continues to be, when you have a tilt going on over here, you continue that tilt over here, and it's an element of consistency, but also it's an unpredictable element, which is why the both of them just work really well together. With that said, this is the basic highlights of what the site looks like. Every single one of these links has something to do with the actual internal sections of the page, which is basically calling this site a one-page site. And you can also switch around the header, switch around the hero section using these coins, which apparently flip to do different things. I think you could have changed this, you could have changed around this accordion menu, because this seems to be a menu, but only one of them is actually moving, which makes me think there's a glitch in there somewhere. And also, when you go ahead and point out the negative points, you kind of start to realize the video in the background is very blurry and very off quality for most of the consistencies of the site, which actually happens to be true not only for the video at the top, but also the show reel. And also when they start to show a lot of their images, there is a lot of inconsistency in terms of the blurriness of the videos. So this is blurry and then it isn't blurry. But when you're making games, it becomes really important to keep things interesting and keep things consistent across zones, which is exactly why I think this site deserves an 8 out of 10. What do you guys think we should rate this site? Because every single element that they should have gotten, including unpredictability, including consistency, including the theme and the vibe going, they've got it right. But the blurriness of the text, as well as the fact that this seems like something that would move, it seems like a couple of moving elements inside of the menu, but it doesn't have those moving elements, is exactly what makes me think this deserves an 8 out of 10. all in all, what do you guys think we should rate it? Come on, don't do anything, just tell me what we should rate it out of 10. And while you're doing that or not doing that, I'm just going to go ahead over to the second site of today. This is called theartofdocumentary.com, because of course, why would we not have documentaries exactly after games? Look at me being inconsistent. The next site that we're talking about is AOD, and again, the fun part with this one is you don't really get the weirdness that you got with the previous site. You don't really get the weirdness that you get with most award sites. You don't really get the weirdness you get with any funky looking site at all. This is the most simplest explanation, most minimal use of the most simple thing in the whole wide world. You have a simple background and then a very, very simple text. It does get all of the basic elements right. For example, sans serif text, especially where it needs to be bold, especially where it needs to make a statement, has been in the trend for a couple of years now, and it's going to stay in the trend for a couple of years because it's very, very dependable, it's very, very reliable, and it seems to be the way the world is moving right now. So no one's moving away from it directly. With that said, every single basic element that you could have had, you have over here. I was annoyed by the weird modal that came in. It shouldn't have come in because you don't really know what the site is about yet as a new user, and if you're an old user, you'll already go to where the news sign up letter needs to go to. With that said, there is a little bit of a highlight to the important text. There is a little bit of color over here, which is what makes things fun. So the challenge with sites that keep everything the way it's supposed to be, like this one, is the fact that you don't have anything that shocks or anything that draws attention, because when you use the most dependable version of sans serif, when you use the most dependable version of white space, when you use the most dependable version of buttons, and the most simplest animation that is taking rounds on the internet now, you run out of ways to make things interesting. But when you highlight the right words, even if it isn't interesting in a jarring fashion, now you're highlighting the elements that need to be highlighted, which is exactly the point that we were missing in the past. So this is quite great. This is quite great from a strategic point of view, if not anything else. And then you also have the weird ability to select all of these from all of these visual mediums, from all of these visual cards, which is fun, because being able to see what's going on visually just does something to humans where they're easily able to connect with the stuff that you're offering, and they're easily able to choose from the stuff you're offering. What's included when you join AOD is all of these different elements, and they stay in their own place. You have icons that have color in them, so you're getting the attention to the right place, and you're keeping the vibe very, very consistent, so it's not very jarring, to say the least, and then you're still getting your attention exactly where it needs to go, which is the great part with this very, very consistent site. And then you also have the same exact font size preserved, the same exact visual spacing preserved from a visual point of view, and then you have a little bit of motion going. And I've said this in the last site and I'll say it again, when you have a list of elements going around, it makes sense to put them in a marquee tag, give them some motion, keep that motion going instead of keeping things very, very static or in terms of a single slider, because when you have motion, even if it's a little bit unexpected, there is intrigue always with sites, which is also something that was happening at the top when we were highlighting these words. There was a little bit of motion going, so very, very small details tying the whole page together until now. Then you have another detailed description of what's going to happen with all of these courses. You have all of these images, and then you have all of this text, and then a very, very clear description of everything that's included, which is nice, because when someone is putting this much money into something, they definitely want to see a visual highlight right away of everything that you're offering, and it definitely makes sense to make things clear as soon as you get into the entire thing. And when I would want to point out here that when the vibe changes, which it changes every single time they create a different course, they are consistent enough and they're in their head enough to know that the vibe is different, and hence the font that represents it must be different, and this applies to everything at all. For example, foundations is a very, very bold word to say sticky, sticks, wide, which are the words that I can associate with this at the moment, and so the font that they use also matches those words exactly. Advanced documentary is a little bit posh, is a little bit different from what you usually see. It's a little bit sophisticated, which is exactly why you can have a sophisticated serif going and no one's going to call you boo on it. And then you also have create none, which is like the most basic raw thing you can say, and then you have the font which is either impact or close to the font family impact, which just brings you there and lets you stay over here. You have perfect cut. I would want to point out here the second word in this phrasing is cut, and then you have all of these edges that cut on their own. Now the reason I'm drawing attention to these seemingly random words is not only do they know they need to change the fonts and they need to change the overall vibe even in a very, very black and white setting, they are very, very aware of the words that are used in making all of these things work, and then those exact words are kind of related to the kind of font that they're making, if that makes sense at all. When you have a word like cinematic eye, you're very, very specific in terms of describing the font, and kind of it's kind of cinematic. This font in its own is a little bit cinematic enough for me to visually have any attention on it. And then finally, this is the fun one. This is exactly the kind of thing I want you to take away from this. If you take one single thing away from today's stream, when you're doing something that's new, which is this new course which they're selling now, they're actively promoting it now, you don't just want it to be very, very consistent. You want to change things up visually. Now, the one common factor, even though they were changing every single font in all of these cards, the one common factor that was always consistent is, guess what it is? I'll give you a second. Is they were using one single font for the single title. This time, when they want to show you this new course that's coming up, when they want to show you this brand new thing that's just entered the chat, they'll kind of change the font into two different fonts, and both of those fonts have their own specific themes, but at the same time, what's jarring to your head is this has two different fonts. This must be something important, which is what they're doing in their own heads. You have a very, very serify font, which is Cinepath, which seems to be a serify word, if that makes sense. Very, very sophisticated on its own kind of vision vibe. And then you have Pro, which is a bold font taking up its space in its own area, nothing embarrassing about it at all, which is exactly what makes all of these courses stand out, even in a very, very visually similar setting, in a very visually expectable setting. So with that said, again, we've seen how this is such a genius move, because not only do you have a lot of consistency going in the site, consistency is the theme of the site, but also you're able to manage expectations in terms of every single course being different and the vibe of every single course still managing to be different, because when you can't change colors, you can still change fonts. That's a continuous principle across web design. If you can't change colors, please change fonts. So over and over, they're doing a pretty good job at highlighting exactly what's new, giving it a little bit of motion, showing you visually what needs to be shown, even if you don't actually physically realize something was being shown to me right now. It's just psychology at this point. It's just psychology. And then you also get bored because you have 6 different cards that were very, very consistent. It just happens. And even if you're the other person that's making the site, you'll scroll and you will figure out at some point, man, this is boring. So you basically switch around the background color, and what you end up with is a different background color with a little bit of consistency, but inconsistent enough to be visually different from the last section that we saw. The basic elements that bound the last section together, we just talked about the differences between each of the cards, each of the documentaries, each of the courses, but there is a little bit of a similarity with all of them. Number one, black, white and orange are the only 3 colors that they'll ever stay with. These are very, very vertical cards. All of these cards are very, very visually vertical, and when you have those elements just be there, and then you also have a very, very fancy font going. But when you get to the bottom, when you get to the next section, and now we're trying to switch up the vibes a little, instead of going with very, very horizontal cards, now you're making vertical cards, which is a visual difference starkly from what we saw, even if it doesn't seem to be the case. Also, they stopped giving us fancy fonts for what the price is or what this specific section is. All of this is the fonts from this single wide font that they've been using since the start of the site. So they do realize that they're switching fonts every single time, and there is a moment to switch fonts and show unique identity, but there also comes a moment where you have to be very, very believable, very, very trustworthy, which is exactly what we need to do when you're doing a pricing section of some sort. And it is exactly when you need to have a very consistent same font that you've been using all of the times, even if the numbers are big. And I would want to point out, when you actually hover over something, a really, really cool effect happens. When you hover over an element, a weird gradient takes over that's kind of fading out, but it's also appearing exactly where it needs to appear to highlight the things that it needs to highlight, and there is motion going on every single time. You need to have motion going on. The last thing I want to talk about the pricing section at all is, you have all of these different cards that are going in their own worlds, and yet they're very, very different from the stuff we usually see online. I'm pretty sure you've seen a bunch of cards, a bunch of consistent UI design patterns, and I can guarantee that there is a very, very small mathematical likelihood that you've seen something like this happen. It's just very, very small at this point. Another section that comes up here, which I'm surprised it came up, because we were done with most of the elements that needed to be on the site. A community and academy to advance your career. And again I would want to point out here, the first section had cards that went like this. The other section that we came to had cards that kind of went down. When you want to have cards that go in another direction now, because you want there to be a different kind of direction, attention to this next section, you obviously can't protrude your cards out into 3D while your screen is still 2D. So what you do is you introduce a little bit of an angle, you introduce a little bit of a delay. When you have these cards that are still going vertically, you have a little bit of delay, stay consistent, and also you have parallax going on with it. Parallax is when two elements on the same screen scroll with a different scrolling speed. So now you have these elements, and I can guarantee if you took a scale and actually measured it, this card, the one on the left, is going faster than the one on the right when you start to scroll things. It's kind of visual, it's kind of parallaxy, and it's hard to believe because it's so small, but this actually exists. So you don't have to study what numbers they used for parallax unless you're designing this exact site, but it makes sense to register in your brain. Parallax is also something they'll use very, very subtly. People won't know, and yet their site will still be dynamic and rememberable. And then one thing that they do right that I just always crave the sites that do wrong is they will always highlight the right word that needs to be highlighted, get the attention exactly where you need to get the attention to. Landed a full-time documentary editing job. Full-time is an important word in this context. Directed and released in is an important word in this context. Film festival is an important word in this context. So important words in context are always continued and celebrated. Prajwal PJ says brain back to you, because I don't know how to respond to that. I'm taking it as a compliment. If it isn't a compliment, let me know. With that said, the next element that we're talking about is the testimonial section, which kind of talks about reviews, but also you're talking about the actual testimony in terms of numbers of the believability of your brand. So over 6,500 plus filmmakers have had careers impacted by AOD, 1,200 plus completed docs, millions of dollars of new client contracts, and 650 plus dollars something festival selection. I'm always confused by the word laurel now, because you had Yanni and Laurel kind of go on and on as the weird mind game that it was. I don't know if people remember it anymore, but it still messes with my brain a little bit. With that said, they still continue with the constant spacing. There is a lot of spacing, there is a lot of white space. They don't push anything together, which is exactly why the site works as well as it does. You have all of these review go on, but also there is a little bit of an unexpected motion. You can view all of the reviews, but I'm pretty sure they're going to be exactly the same. And also a good point that they've added over here is they will tell you that this came from Google, so you can go ahead and check it up. It's not made up, and there is a little bit of a consistency that's going on over here. Our student success rate is unmatched. You have another title going, and then you have all of these different elements. Wow, I opened up a video. I shouldn't be doing that on live stream, but you have a weird video based slider go on. The good thing that I want to talk about here is when they need to highlight something, when they need to talk about something, you can count on them to talk about something. When you want there to be a little bit of a border for this exact video and a title, they will have a very cinematography background, camera based 2012 cameras kind of border going on, just so they can put across the video the point that they need to put across. And you can scroll across these as well. You can do it if you want to, and you also see how many of these there are, so you don't get confused in terms of have I seen them all, have I not seen them all, what's going on. And then you also have real testimonials. I learned more in the first 5 videos of AOD than 2 years of film school. So again, you get very, very clear with what you're presenting and where you're presenting it. You have a very, very clear price comparison chart, and I'm actually surprised how they managed to make it this far. People don't make such clean, consistent sites for such a long period of time, but they've managed to do it, so 2 points for that. But with that said, they're very, very clear in terms of why their price is better than film school, why it's providing more value, why it's more useful, and you get to compare it visually. You get to believe that they're providing a better service, and even if it's not the case, it's very, very consistent, and it provides a level of trust that you wouldn't usually have if you were doing the calculations in your own head. Even if they're a little bit biased, they are still able to put forth an image visually that cultivates trust, which is exactly what needs to be done in this case. You have your course instructors, font size still remains same, font sliders still remain same, everything that you would need to have here remains exactly the way it needs to be. I would want to point here that if you're making something that looks exactly like this, you would want to have a little bit of an extra space go on to the left and right. As I'm talking, I'm realizing the device that I use to read comments from the studio is running out of battery, criminally low, and I will have to stop or do something about the screen. I have no idea what's going on anymore. Just can you guys give me a moment? Can someone type yes in the chat if you can give me a moment, if you can wait around, or I will continue the stream as long as it kind of goes on, because I'm pretty sure I've messed up somehow today. This is so weird. All right, let's just leave it exactly the way it is. Access industry experts with monthly coaching. I'll just do a couple of these, and then if the battery runs out, we'll jump over to the studio on this device itself. What the hell. Anyways, Prajwal says okay. I'm a little bit nervous still. We'll continue exactly the way we're continuing, and then we'll try to shift if something really bad happens, which it might happen. So be ready if I'm gone for a second. With that said, again, you have a very consistent font size go on. Thank you so much, Prajwal, for that kind gesture. You have a bunch of images, you have a bunch of videos that are taking their own speed, taking their own space, taking their own area, zooming out, taking exactly the amount of area that they need to take out, and highlighting themselves when the time comes, which is a subtle effect. You wouldn't notice it, but then again, you have another chance after comparing the prices and after comparing everything that happens with these reviews and successes. You get another chance to have a price investment go on here, which is what's shocking me, because usually you only get to see pricing sections once, but they're bold enough to put the pricing section present on the same page twice, in case you've reconsidered, in case you were saying no in the first place, and now they finally convinced you with all of their reviews and testimonials to finally say yes. Or on the flip side of things, if you were unconvinced before and kind of on a meh kind of space, and now you're just having more confidence in your own decisions, this is a good place to let you believe that you have the option to buy again. And then again, your students are winning awards, so again they go into a kind of a loop where they're trying to tell you, this is our course, please buy our course, and then they give you an option to buy, but then some people will have doubts, so they introduce a bunch of testimonials and reviews and trust from the outside, and then they give you another option to buy, and then if you're still not convinced, they'll give you another option with the great achievements of their students, which is again, is it a sales tactic? Probably. Is it an effective sales tactic? Yes. So I do think they are very consistent in their need to sell, but it's brave and it's bold and it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do, which is surgical at this point, which is it's entirely great. And then you have a very simple footer that's kind of continuing its space. You have a footer that takes up its entire space and it takes up its entire area. You can have a title, you can have a description, you can have a button, and you can have a bunch of links. So again, you have all of the different things that you would need to have. Very consistent, very simple font, the second description font that they were using. This font is only used for technicalities, like over here the title or these links. It's not used for the announcement fonts. So they're very consistent with the fonts and the way they're doing things, which is kind of great. With that said, this site takes consistency of clear choices and adds to it the unintentional or unexpected element of surprise to catch you just at the right places. It uses a bunch of tactics, but it does them wonderfully. We saw parallax, we saw colors change, we saw fonts change, we saw them change background colors as soon as things got boring. We saw them change fonts as soon as they were giving us different course reviews. So I'm just going to say that this is, for me, a 10 out of 10 site, because they're just doing everything that you could possibly want a site to do, and I am not very stingy with points at this point. So 10 out of 10. theartofdocumentary.com, you have my complete blessing. The next site that we're talking about is stewardpartners.studio. Let's see what this one is about. I have no idea, you guys, so let's just see what comes up. Firstly, you have a very modern art kind of site, and I say modern art because it's not very common to see sites like these at this point. Hold up. Is the stream interrupted? Give me a moment. I think the stream might be interrupted. back. I believe the break has ended. What happened there was completely weird because these streams usually don't interrupt, and finally they did. So I guess all of us got to see something new today. Someone is absolutely messing with my head because I can't get these things to work right today. What's going on? This is the weirdest thing. This is the weirdest thing that's ever happened ever on these streams. Like, stream interrupted out of sudden. How? Let's go back to exactly where we were. We were talking about Stewart and Partners, which is another studio once again, and yet they're very modern art themed, which is exactly what makes you go in awe visibly with them. So you have this very, very simple. What just happened? You have this very, very simple. A bunch of things are happening. My apologies. You have these very, very simple design element B, and you have it animate, and you have it stay maybe as a video on the screen, and then you have all of these text elements stay, and again they give you these coordinates and they give you their actual time. I think people would have a hard time figuring out where these coordinates are, but there's a level of mystery to it, so I'll give them that. As soon as you start to scroll, I can guarantee, even before seeing this site, you guys, this is going to be a very, very modern art inspired piece, and I can't guarantee I'll like it simply because I don't get modern art. I just don't get it yet. I still have a hard time figuring out why modern art and how modern art, and ever since it came to UI design, I'm a little bit annoyed about that. With that said, you still have the weird video going on, and you have your video in the background, but it's taking up an entire amount of screen space, which is brave, which is visibly taking up its space, but it's a good thing to do. With that said, you also have Stewart and Partners, their sticky title continuing every single place, and you also have this wide. Yes, the font size is same, but sometimes instead of changing font sizes for descriptions and for longer pieces of text, modern art pieces specifically, and only modern art pieces, will reduce the text colors weight. So they'll basically reduce the darkness of the black, and they make a gray, and then that's what they use for descriptions. This is very, very limited to modern art, don't get me confused, but I do realize that even if you figure out a way to deal with modern art, it's going to be a trend, and it's going to stay. Like, I have my own doubts about it. You won't see me make too many modern art pieces, but it is a trend, and it stays exactly where it stays, and you will see this coming. If you are interested in modern art, this is the theme, this is the way to jump on, although the font sizes need to be exactly the same, and it's really, really easy to mess up, but I have to say that this is a trend, and I have to say that this will continue, so it's not the most surprising thing that it came on. This next section is a bunch of images appearing as hints to us, kind of giving us a visual feedback into what we were hoping things were. This is Stewart and Partners in all of their image gallery. Instead of having all of their images appear at once, they have taken parallax, which we just talked about, scrolling happening at different speeds, and given it overdrive. This is just parallax and overdrive. You have all of these different images come in, and they're moving at different speeds, but they will eventually arrange exactly the way they need to arrange themselves, but still there's a little bit of an overdrive because every single element is every single place, so it's arranging itself in a very, very simple format, and it's changing exactly however it needs to change, highlighting the right element at the right place, but it came in a very weird, unbelievable, unrealistic parallaxy format. It was extreme parallax. So again, a couple of elements that are very, very common is, instead of making the text small for descriptions, they'll make the text lighter. Instead of letting there be a single kind of a thing which keeps on going, you'll have a bunch of parallax going on. Wow, everything is seeming to be lagging, but I'll leave that to God. Instead of a lot of space crammed up together, which happens in non-modern art inspired normal sites, they're still letting there be a lot of white space, which is something that keeps on continuing. So I will give them that. They've used a bunch of elements to get these things to work. I believe I have to charge the device for live streaming with. I'm so sorry, you guys. This is the most interrupted I've ever been on any live stream ever. No idea why it's happening. Usually all of these things are arranged. You have to believe me. I'm pretty sure I broke something there. This is going into a blooper reel. Wow. Can't stop breaking things. This is incredible. And we weren't even on a break. This is even more fun than a break. VN says hi, hello, welcome back. I may have electrocuted myself mildly. Maybe it was life-threatening, maybe it was not, but it probably wasn't because I'm still alive and well. But with that said, we have electricity. Can we just be grateful for that? Let's just go back to exactly what we were talking about. Modern art pieces have a couple of elements that are always working together, always in a lot of synchronicity, which is exactly what makes them fun. You'll have a ton of white space, you'll have all of this text that goes blurry as soon as the value is fading instead of it going smaller, and then you have a ton of weird parallax scrolling effects happening. So instead of changing these images normally, they're kind of changing them or getting rid of them entirely, which is not something you usually see in normal sites. This is a very short site too, because I would have expected a longer something from this entire site, and it's a very visually short site. Like, you can go to the next pages, but it still remains very, very short and very, very blurred out in its context. And now you have text, and now you have an image, and now you have all of these elements going on. And again, they're using one principle that we saw from last site that we ever saw, from the last site that we saw. How am I messing up English now? You have two different words, and they're highlighting the right kind of word with the right kind of font family, which isn't something that you normally see happen a lot, but it's definitely a trend, especially in modern art kind of pieces. And they have the intelligence to make the word intelligence serify with the serif font family types, and they're making it sophisticated, and design is plain as always. So again, do they know what they're making? Yes. Are they precise in their choices? Yes. Am I still a little bit annoyed that this is kind of modern art-ish? Maybe I am. Maybe I'm biased. With that said, again, you have all of these elements and all of these people that you can see. This text block is sticky anyways, and you have all of these different people that you can highlight as soon as you hover over their names. With that said, I will still, and I know this sounds weird, we have this exact same rectangle that we saw in the very beginning come back here, and people might be confused at what this rectangle is. Is this rectangle their logo? No, it's not their logo. This is a modern variation of the golden rectangle. So if you're not sure what the golden rectangle is, let me know in the chat. Type GR and I'll search up or explain golden rectangle to you. But if you already know what golden rectangle is, it's a weird rectangle with ratios that kind of keep repeating throughout nature. It's kind of recursive, and it's present in design as well as programming or development, and wherever it's present, it's very, very reminiscent. People will always report to remembering this in the past. So it's a freaky phenomenon that happens with this specific shape, and they keep on letting this shape come back as a sign of consistency. Wow, this was unexpected. They were like the coolest kid ever. They were just plain white and black, a ton of white space. This is starting to be a fun site. Like, I was hoping this would be a modern, boring art piece, but this is starting to be more and more fun. As soon as you hover over one of these, you get to see this text that you weren't able to see, which I accidentally discovered. Maybe they should add like a hover here kind of sign. But the bright color that you get, along with specific areas of this rectangle highlighted out, I'm just in love. This is the stuff that's going to break my fear of modern art kind of sites, because they can still surprise you. I think the only reason I was a little bit on the edge about modern art sites is because you know they're going to put in a bunch of padding and white space, and you know you're going to hate it. But I don't hate this at all. I know this is a little bit unexpected. Maybe they should have added a hover over me, cursor hijack or something over here, but it's not the end of the world. Even if they didn't, it's an accidental nice Easter egg, and it works really, really well in their favor. Like, could this give someone seizures? Does it have that risk? Not at this stage, but maybe it could, because again, accessibility and motion and colors are really, really thin lines to cross. But it's very unexpected, which is the special part about the site. So I'm going to approve of it at the end of the day. You have text exactly where text needs to be, you have an image where it needs to be, and then you have a little bit of text going on here as well. And again, you have a parallax kind of scroll thing as well, because if you compare the speed at which this image gallery is going compared with the entire page, it's a little bit different. Like, if you look at it really carefully, you will know it's really, really different. So with that said, are they doing something different? Yes, they most definitely are. And they also have a different kind of font section going here. So at the end of the day, the vibes that they go over here with are much, much different. I am a little bit disappointed at why they would have an element as cool as this Easter egg and not place it on the first page, because not everyone goes to the about page, not everyone goes to the second or the third page, and not everyone continues to be exactly where they are, and then they've allowed us with the ability to kind of keep that coming. So again, this is a nice site at the end of the day. With that said, Stewart Partners Studio is an incredible site. It's very, very interesting, very, very modern artish. I am a little bit annoyed at why they've used latitude, longitude, I believe, as their location, but also it makes things really, really interesting. And all the Easter egg at the end of it all saved my doubts about what a modern art site should look like. With that said, people might wonder what I'd rate the site, considering my not very supportive stance on modern art sites. I will surprisingly give it a 10 out of 10, simply because I think it manages the modern art line very, very well, and then it surprised me at the end. And when a site leaves you surprised at the beginning with this weird number, and then at the end with all of these hints, I think that's when they really succeed. Because the only reason I am biased towards a specific type of sites as a whole is because they're very, very consistent, and even though there's going to be a white space and elements arranged weirdly, you still know that it's going to look the same. Like, you still know all of these modern art sites could belong in one single mega site. But I don't think that's the case with this exact site, especially because you have all of these different elements that come together but also surprise you unintentionally at different places. So I have to say that the site does really, really take away my long-standing fear of modern art sites. So let me know what you guys think of this site, because I am definitely surprised at what this site is. The next site that we're talking about is digitalmosaic.com/en, which I'm suspecting is in English, because sometimes you have sites in different languages. For example, we have Italian over here, and you could change the languages if you needed to. They're from Italy, and then they display the time. Is it just me, or are most sites that are coming up with the future kind of showing us the position and the time of the people who made that site? I think that's a trend that's going on, and it's really interesting note to take when you take all of these things into consideration. But you also have a simple title bar going at the top with the logo, with a couple of links, and with the most basic titles in the whole world. We have every single element that you need to call it the standard title, the standard header work. And then you also have a little bit of a title and a little bit of a description going. So again, all of the standard elements that you need to have for a modern site are there. You have a title, you have a color scheme. I am a little bit concerned at the background shade and then the blue over here. So again, I have to say at this point, the blue that's present isn't working really, really well, especially because it's on a gradient from a really, really dark to a really, really light shade. And then there's a video in the background which kind of offsets colors by a little bit. When you have this much color activity happening, then you basically end up in a place where colors are kind of offset and accessibility in terms of colors is affected, because now you have all of these audiences on the web who are either not seeing the whole color spectrum, which actually happens, who are either colorblind, or there is some other visual difficulty which basically makes it alienated as a color and as a clear word, even though you are trying to highlight this word clearly, a clear reality to many audiences, which isn't a smart move to do. Like, this color could have been darker and it would have been better accessibility wise. Would have been better style wise? No, maybe not, but it does do a little bit of a good job in terms of accessibility. With that said, I am definitely surprised at how well this is moving, because it's 3D, you guys. I know no one is noticing it. I know everyone thinks this is still a background, but if this is a background video, they used some kind of a 3D motion to kind of make this happen, because this is also using parallax, different scroll speeds, but you also have this single block at the bottom kind of shift on its own angle, and then you have a bunch of text that's going on in its own speed. So again, when you have two different scrolling speeds, call it parallax, move on. And now you have a bunch of text that isn't very, very small, but is highlighting the words that it needs to highlight, and is putting across one bold point along with a bunch of white space just to make things work. And I forgot to mention, up until this point, they have a cursor hijacker as well. So you have this cursor which is basically hijacked, and what it does is it blurs over the background, which kind of makes things fun, and it kind of makes you realize you have actual power to change the fabric of this background. So that's actually quite powerful. I like that. And then you have this bunch of description text kind of going, which people might not read, but they do highlight the words that they need to highlight. They do make the words capital, which they want to make capital, and they do let their name be visible. You can play the show reel if you want to play it, and it is quite visible at the background behind my camera, but I'm not going to do that, especially because streams don't really allow us show reels. With that said, you have this really, really offset variation of selected projects, where the specific projects that they've worked with, you can work with, you can kind of see, and they're very, very interesting because they're very, very edgy, they're very, very different, and they work. I am a little bit surprised at what this is going to do, so I'm going to explore one of these. Again, this entire project is completely different from what you'd usually see any site be like, and then they keep that innovativeness and they let that innovativeness stay as consistency across a completely different project. So the entire elements are exactly the same, and yet the colors and the vibe and the and the flavor basically changes. So the background color changes, the color choices change. You don't have as high of a cursor hijacker, yet you have every single description in a very, very organized pattern, to say the least, and then you have your videos and then your basic descriptions available as well. So you can work with this fabric. The cursor hijacker does come back when you actually need there to be some impact in terms of indicating to the user that you can actually work with this fabric, but even without it, the way they've positioned the text doesn't really let there be space for much else, which is actually a good thing, because when you want to highlight the text and when you're letting the text go across exactly as it needs to, it's the most expressive thing you can do, and it's incredible. With that said, the next section that we're talking about is this card, which is exactly similar to the card that we came to this specific microsite at. So this specific project that we came to with a card that wasn't exactly a rectangle, it was this edgy, weird shape, which is exactly where we came from. And then this is another testament to how every single card that we're using uses their consistent edgy cutoff vibe. So again I'm going to talk about this concept one more time, maybe for the millionth time ever in my lifetime. When you have a weird thing that you've tried on a site that works, that looks good, it makes sense to keep it consistent as often as you can, just because when you have an element that's kind of cut off, when you have an element that's kind of different, you still let there be a level of consistency in what the user sees, because when you invent something new, the user is completely unaware, but when you let the things stay with the user for a little while, then they can start to warm up to it a little bit, and they can start to realize what this is, how this is, and then they can start to let this thing make sense. And then again, you have a little bit of a description going. It's text, which is small, which is large, but it takes up its entire space. The biggest concern with sites like these is, to me as a designer and developer, when you have a site like this which is showing off a physically different, very, very colorful product, the images are going to overtake your text, which happens more times than I'd like to admit. But when you have text that takes up a lot of space, very, very big, very, very large, or small text that takes up a lot of area in terms of being very, very long, then you let text take the space it needs to take, and you let the images be exactly where they are, and you let both of these elements work exactly as they need to. You can try Carta Nostra on Steam because it seems to be a form of a game, and you can do all of the things you want to do from a casual footer and then have a description going. But at the end of the day, I do have to say, this is a very simple site, and it's a very consistent site, and they do a little bit of difference. They do have a little bit of a edgy cut off from both opposite ends kind of rectangle vibe, and they let that stay consistent across every single element they can let it stay consistent at, which is one of the reasons it works so well. Let's just go back. Again, this keeps on going until you have nothing but text to see, which is exactly what's important, especially because when you're developing stuff like AR and VR and games and progressive web apps, there is a lot of images involved, and there's a lot of bold color text involved, and so it becomes important for you to offset images and their fabric just enough for the user to not see what's inside the images, but also see what your approach is and what your services are. So I think making this text big, making this text bold and black and important was important, and they managed to do that. Even if what I said did not make sense, let it make sense to you. Let yourself think about it for a little while, and then you have the important words, important elements highlighted very, very clearly, which just keeps on going as long as it needs to. And again, this site remains consistent in every single way that we've seen, and it has a footer that is once again very, very similar to the exact same pattern that we just saw before. Overall, Digital Mosaic is a fun site that introduces a couple of new elements. It has a lot of challenges to overcome in terms of the colors that they've used, because this will take a testing tool like Google Lighthouse, which tests how accessible your site is across to users, and this will definitely set it off, because this text color is messing up the whole fabric at the background, and there isn't enough contrast with the WCAG contrast ratio ratings, or to simplify what I just mean, to let there be a very, very dark thing in front of you and the very, very light background. Like, that's just a very, very basic requirement of accessibility, which does not happen because this text kind of blends out, which may have been a design based choice, but it becomes a problem when you're doing it in the long term. You have another site, which is our second last site of the day. Of course, I want the site to be in English because I have no idea what French says. Let's just see what happens anyways, because it's probably going to be in French, but there is going to be a design lesson in there somewhere. We have a very animated aesthetic, a simple video inside of a black screen. You have a very simple piece of text there, and you have, wow, did you guys see that? I just saw that and I'm still in my head. You have this text at its corners that's kind of going inside of the blue box, which is fun because you have a ton of unexpected motion, very, very water inspired, kind of river inspired. I can bet right now that this entire blue single pointer will take up this entire river's journey, gives you the important images, lets you explore exactly what you need to explore, lets there be a count of kilometers. This feels like a very, very physical journey through a map of water, which is difficult to do in terms of thinking, but it's actually very, very simple to create in the real world. So we've seen SVGs, which are just scalable vector graphics, which can take up exactly the amount of space they need to take up, especially when you're prototyping, especially when you're animating. This text takes a simple SVG, lets it continue overall on its entire spacing, lets there be a bunch of images, lets the images take their space, and you can physically see how much of the distance has been covered. You can physically see a map of what's going on. The map changes color surprisingly, because water does get green and areas do get green, and I think it's going to change colors a little bit more, and it basically takes you on a very consistent journey where there are just 4 elements: this SVG map, a changing background color, a text based light description of what's going on, and there is a ton of parallax going on, because all of these images, even if you don't see it yet, are scrolling in different speeds with relation to the background of the page, which is slower because you have this text over here which is in a different slower speed go on. So like that just keeps on happening, and it takes a very, very consistent journey across the colors and the time and the place and the map. So with that said, I would want to point out, very, very consistent site, very, very simple site. It does get boring at times because you have like 80 out of 80 to do, 812 kilometers. It shows you a very, very clear journey from somewhere in France to Mediterranean somewhere sea. But again, very, very cool in terms of the styling, very, very cool in terms of the way they're making stuff up. Designing Hub says hi, hello, welcome back. We're reviewing Incredible Awwwards sites today, and all of the different consistencies and elements that work with this site are what ties it together really, really closely. Overall, I'm going to rate this a 7 out of 10 because the scrolling at some point from 1 to 80 became really, really exhausting, because people do get bored when you're asking them to do 80 variations of the same thing, even if the journey that you're describing is long and you want to let them feel it. These images and the way they worked was brilliant, because there was a level of newness to the whole thing, but at some point the same exact pattern keeps on ruminating so hard, keeps on going forward so much that people get bored, and people just and people will leave this site because it keeps on ruminating, it keeps on circulating in its own circles, and it keeps on going in its own formats. So that definitely is a concern to me. With that said, 7 out of 10, not bad for a site that looks this cool. The last site that we're looking at today is superpower.com. Again, very, very powerful domain name. I am surprised at how much it either cost them or how old they've been to get access to a domain name like superpower.com, because anyone who's ever got a domain name knows how difficult it is to secure the right word at the right time. Otherwise, it's just gone. So with that said, they do get that right at the very least. There is a simple, very, very basic kind of text that takes over the entire screen, and the button, which is very, very white and simple, which shouldn't have shown out, is still shining, because there is a little bit of a radial glow at the background, there is a little bit of a light at the background, and it just stays exactly the way it is. But it is also a mirror to how the silhouette is kind of highlighted by a radial gradient in the background. So again, radial light appearing from the background, light appearing from the button, consistency. as soon as I start to scroll, and I'm not entirely sure how they got up with this idea, as soon as you start to scroll this site, the color of the background starts to become brighter and everything just becomes more and more illuminated. I'm legitimately scrolling this right now, and it's becoming creepy how scrolly and colorful it is. You enter this weird time space, which I think would have been better as a video, you guys, because people don't scroll as consistently as you might hope. Your supernatural test 10 times better than annual physical. Again, Supernatural is doing home tests, but the way they're making that work over here is really, really cool. Designing Hub says the scroll looks cool, but maybe too long, but hero section looks cool. If you're talking about the last site that we saw, the whole site with the journey, that is absolutely true. The scrolling was very, very cool, but when it gets boring and when people have seen it 100 different times over, like it was legitimately a counter of 1 out of 80, 2 out of 80, everyone is bored, including me and you. This is absolutely true. It was so long and so boring and so ruminative, overthinking kind of feel that I was just over it. I was just over it by the time we were done, which is exactly why I wanted to pull back 3 different points, because it's so boring by the end of the entire thing, and that's what makes you leave. You go to this next site, which is superpower.com, which I'm still not sure how they got this domain name, because it's very, very hard. I'm just going to be honest, this is really, really difficult to get. You have these different tests that kind of happen on their own and take up their entire space. Again, I will say this is very similar, eerily similar to the last site that we saw in terms of one card being really, really cool, zooming in as soon as you scroll over it, and there being text, and it kind of keeps on repeating over and over again, and I have a feeling this is going to get boring too, but maybe that's just my previous scares of the way things were kind of acting up. This site does have a very black and white feel, but it lets things take up its entire color when you actually start to hover over them. But the problem with this kind of a feel is when you have to wait this long to be able to see the actual color on these sites, like when it gets really, really dark and black and white, if you don't hover over it, if it gets grayscale, then you don't know the actual lengths of the limits of the site's colors. Like it gets really, really difficult to understand them at all. And then you have these elements that are text related, that are key points, but at the end of the day it's really difficult to figure out, because I just think in some part of my head I just think grayscaling everything is just going to get really boring really, really quickly. Like it happened before, happens again. I am not entirely sure why you would want these scary and even real words, for example HDL, cholesterol, cortisol, mercury, vitamin D. And can I just say the way things have been in the last couple of years, since 2019, these words will definitely make anyone scared. Like it happens, you know why. And then you have all of these and you have this all of these different words scrolling across the screen, and at some point in your head you're like, why is this happening? Like I get the fact that they were trying to be fun and trying to be special, but it gets really, really weird at some point. It gets really, really scary weird at some point. And again, you have these lines that are just vertical, horizontal, exactly the way they're supposed to be. And then you also find out that they're backed by the best, which is incredible. You have all of these different doctors and for some reason a football player, which is also backing a medical review site. But at the end of the day, very, very consistent look and feel. Again, things get sticky in one single area, and then everything loses much context when you take everything of the entire page and stick it in one place. This is the opposite of having too much white, like too little white space. When you have too much white space, this stuff is so crammed together without enough motion and without like life and grayscale that things get boring. I'll tell you why this site is so weird to us. Number one, there was grayscale in these images until we hovered over them, but we didn't know we had to hover over them. Number two, you have these elements that are just clumped together as one, no animation, nothing new happening. And number three, you expect there to be a lot of fun, but it doesn't happen. Like even the first hero animation didn't happen until you started scrolling. This site expects, I'm going to be harsh here and say, this site expects too much of the user too soon. When someone is new to your site, when someone is just starting out, they want to have a new look and feel, and they want to be guided a tiny bit on how to make the site move and work. But you're making this yourself work too hard with this one. Like you have to scroll to be able to see the animations. You have to be able to hover over elements just to see their colors. You have to work too hard to see something very, very simple. Unlock all potentials your life holds. Something, C-section, born, age 26, know your baseline. So this seems to be, I don't want to say it, this seems to be the way they've positioned their selling isn't even salesy. And I get that this is a health related site. This seems to be very, very multi-level marketing scammy, because you're starting with Bond and then you're starting with age 26, age 27, age 30. Either I was right and this site is really, really old, or wow, they go up to age 120, which is actually really hard to see these days. They start with the 0 and then they make you a customer for life, which seems to be a really bad scam for a site that calls itself superpower.com. It's this seems to be some sort of a, like, I'm not believing it. What could cost you $15,000 is $499. Wow, what a nice way to get us into your product. Superpower membership, $42 a month, 100 plus lab tests yearly. I just looked at it, I thought 100 plus lab tests that they will do to you yearly, which is horrifying. I think they should make themselves a little bit more clearer, because the way they're phrasing things is definitely off. The born at C-section, age 0 to age 120 to 100 plus lab tests yearly, which if you do to one person, I'm pretty sure they'll kill you. This is messed up. This is the phrasing and the sales is this. It's all very, very messed up. It's designing how says looks like every bit of information is being put on main page should be short sections to give brief introduction about the product. Exactly, someone got it finally. Thank you so much for saying that. This is absolutely true. Someone go read Designing Hub's comment, even if you're watching this in the future, because look at the phrasing, you guys. I am so mad at the phrasing. Age 0, born, like, this is so weird. And then they will make you a customer for life up until age 160, 120, which is a far stretch in 2025. Like, how many of us know people who go at the age of 120? I would definitely be shocked if that was the case in real life, but it isn't. Like, that's when you start to seem a little bit finicky, and then you do 100 plus lab tests early, which horrified me, because I thought you were going to stick 100 needles in me, which is messed up. Get your copywriting team in line. This is messed up. This is off the rails now. Frequently asked questions, again, very, very minimal theme that they've tried to give us is very, very maximal, because for some reason, as Designing Hub said, this does not belong here, and people can sense it to the point where it's a little bit too fake. With that said, the last section, thankfully, of Superpower is finally here, and you have a grand build section that takes up its entire space in the footer, which is actually a common footer trend, like having the brand name B as a wide word in the footer. They do have a video in the background, surprisingly, that's moving horrifyingly slow, or either it's moving only when we're scrolling and hovering over the things, but whatever it is something dynamic. And then everything that's at the bottom is just very, very simple, and I'm pretty sure there's a scroll glitch over here as well. With that said, Superpower, what a weird site. I am going to rate this a 6 out of 10, because it does have effort. Like, it was a difficult site to make. Like, when you have a site that increases its brightness as you start to scroll, it's definitely them doing a very, very gradual video, continuing it as long as they need to continue it, and then they're definitely very, very thoughtful in the way they make things, although they do get thoughtless when they start copywriting. As soon as it's like one of those sayings, you have a pretty face, but as soon as you open your mouth, everything is destroyed. I was still liking the site, but as soon as they said born age 0, C-section, and then 120 age, and then you're apparently supposed to be their customer for the entirety of 120 years, that definitely messed with my head a little bit. I'm not going to lie. This is a cool site, 6 out of 10, but for some reason I accidentally read the text, especially the 100 plus lab yearly phrasing, which is still in my head for some reason, and I'm so scared to go back and read more. But my point is, it's really, really 100 plus lab tests. This isn't the word you should put in the first place. Like, it definitely triggers 100 plus lab tests on the user. It's messed up. It's messed up. Very, very bad. Like, you could have put a different, I understand it's about 100 different types of tests whenever you want, I hope, but this is messed up in its phrasing, and that's why I have to take like 4 points off. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, 6 out of 10 for a creepy site like Superpower, whose phrasing says 100 plus lab tests, all for $4.99, which definitely makes me think you're doing 100 plus lab tests on a single user at one point of time, which was actually, in their phrasing, it was 100 plus lab tests per year. So 365 days divided by 100, every 3 to 4 days you're doing another lab test on someone, which is unnatural to me. Overall, nice site. I do appreciate the way they came forward, put themselves, and I know that designing it was harder than it looks to anyone at all. Like it's definitely very, very hard to get a site like this to work the way it did, and yet they kind of messed it up, which is exactly why this is a 6 out of 10. As always, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching. I'm live here every single day, 9 p.m. Indian Standard Time or 3:30 p.m. GMT. I've been screaming for such a long time that my voice has absolutely changed. So if you are listening to this through voice, which why are you doing that? I'm pretty sure you're picking up something weird going on. I will see you again tomorrow.